Conversation with Hassan Ghiassi. I have the privilege of having met Hassan through a training that both of us were part of because we are, I think it's fair to say, dialogue groupies. And so anytime there's a model or a tool or an opportunity to gain skills in different ways to bring people together, which is our passion, we take advantage of it. And so we happen to be in a kind of intensive long-term training and got to know each other. And I learned about this incredible model, Aristotles Cafe, that he has created and that has spread across the universe. And I'm excited to have him with us today. I want to be sure you all know this is a three-parter. And so Hassan has agreed to be part of us for multiple opportunities. So today is the interview and overview. We'll just be together for a short hour to learn more about his work. Tomorrow is an intensive faculty staff training. It'll be 3 hours from 1 to 4. If you are not signed up for that and are interested, please private message me in the chat and I will get that link to you so you can register and be ready for that. And then on October 13th at the same time, we'll have an intensive training for student leaders. And so if you work with students or you're aware of students, I know that we have folks that are connected to AmeriCorps Vista on this call. That is obviously a group that we know that's doing work in the community that could also benefit from that student-facing training. And so it is my pleasure at this time to turn it over to Hassan. And I have a couple of questions. We wanted to do this sort of like an interview conversation. And so welcome, Kevin.
Hello.
So Hassan, what is Aristotle's Cafe? And what are the circumstances that caused you to start these conversations when you were just a college student?
Thanks, Leslie, and thanks for the kind introduction too. And hi, everyone. Aristotle's Cafe is really a format that I designed to enhance local, state, and national discourse through our approach to facilitation with empathy, effective listening, and really just building community through that process. And so we really hope to empower people that come to our groups to move towards the best version of themselves, whatever that might be. Everyone has a role to play in this country and in this world. And so we really don't have finite answers, but we, through our process, allow people to come to their own conclusions and pursue their passions. And there's a longer story of how I came about it, Leslie. I don't know how much or little you want to know, but I did start as a university student. So I was studying communication and physics. I was double majoring in these two really similar focuses. And I took a study abroad semester in Sweden. And when I came back, I had actually a debate coach that was in the communication department that wanted to find a way to have students speak a little bit outside the classroom. And so I raised my hand to volunteer to do that with maybe 15 or 16 other students. And each week we were breaking into these rooms together without much of a structure. And I was just trying some things. I was trying to have students talk and trying to find some way to have them do that. And week after week, I didn't know if I was doing well or not. And then one day I got called into her office and I thought I was in trouble. And she told me that the reviews were all really consistent, but very different than the other students. So first they said, this guy, Hassan, he barely says anything. He's not adding any value. He doesn't know anything. We don't know why he's in the room. He barely even talks. He doesn't even have to be there. And then the second feedback was, this was great. I never learned this kind of stuff. I wish we could do this more. This was, really valuable for me. So I taught my peers, the peer students, and then the peers taught the freshman professors, and it became a requirement for all incoming freshmen the next year. And the format we ended up calling Aristotle's Cafe. And it's been something that I've been doing for the past 16 years, each and every week, all across the world. So
tell us about the name, Aristotle's Cafe.
Yeah, so I have to say the name is interesting. I think that the professor that I had was very inspired by a book called Socrates Cafe by a man named Christopher Phillips. And I think she didn't really know what she wanted to do, but she wanted to make it more student-led, and Aristotle being the student of Plato and that whole lineage. And so I think that's kind of why it came about. But over the years, it's really been wonderful because we do cover so many different topics, and that's what Aristotle has been known for, right? So many different subjects and ways of thinking, and everything from persuasion to, science or math or astrology. And so it's been really a fitting name to allow people to come in and really practice being thoughtful, critically thinking, and also finding ways to engage our democracy in healthy ways.
All right, so tell us about this journey from creating this model or facilitating this model as a college student. Then it became a requirement, obviously, for freshmen at your institution. And then today it's all over the world. And so tell us a little bit about that journey.
Yeah, so one thing is that I really should make a note, and maybe, any fellow educators in the room know this, is that sometimes it's difficult to show value on things that don't lead to immediate, measurable, systematized results. And I think, to be really honest and really transparent, I think that was a big struggle for me starting off in that way. I came into it from a really organic, natural way. I didn't necessarily know the words or the names or the techniques that I was using. I only found out about 3 years ago that there's people called facilitators, and it's actually a profession. I just thought I was the only one. I didn't know there was such thing as dialogue. I didn't know about any of these techniques or any of these other things. All I knew is that in the sessions that I was leading, I was able to create this cross-generational learning, and I saw from participants the value and the ways that they would transform and come out kind of beginning and ending to this, and also the long-term transformation that it takes for, I think people don't change overnight. So the fact that I could see the difference between someone that would come weekly for 6 months, for a year, for 2 years, and that transformation isn't apparent if you're not paying attention to the right key things, right? And I think so. I had a lot of support institutionally as an undergraduate student. I didn't have so much support as a graduate student, to be very honest. And when I continued on, I think this is something that I'd be happy to talk about more. But as I continued on, does the corporate sector want people to think critically and get along and communicate better? Yes. Does it always take the form of group dialogue? Not necessarily, until it's maybe team building, or some kind of conflict resolution. And then on the other side, our volunteer organization, and that's the thing that's really built and grown, which is giving people voice in communities. And so that's how it really has expanded. And we are now in Iceland, Myanmar, Thailand, Mongolia, Indonesia, and other countries are popping up because the model is easy to implement. You don't need to have any kind of specific background or knowledge. Just you have to be a process expert, right? Facilitators are process experts, not knowledge experts. And so we really deliver this in different ways to different communities, and I allow them to take their own approach to it. In Thailand, it was led this morning, our time, evening their time, and it's done in the Thai language. Our American sessions are normally an hour long. Thai sessions are typically 3 to 4 hours long. They like to talk a lot in Thailand, and so I don't stop that from happening. And in Iceland, it's more of a movement along democratic engagement by the youth, and they do a lot of activities with youth organizations where in Iceland right now, it is young people leading this for other young people, and it's all around voting and democracy.
Wow, that's really interesting. We may have some questions later on about that. Hassan, I'm going to take a step back and ask, what is it, do you think, that either in your past, your journey, that prompted this desire in you to have meaningful conversations with others? Is there something about your story that that draws you to this kind of conversation?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think, I think it's like everyone that works in a space of kind of helping people communicate or come together, there's always something in the past. And for me specifically, it's the past and ongoing, which is, I'm born to a family. My father's from Iran. I was born in St. Louis, Missouri. My mom, she was brought up Jewish. And so my family is full of different religions, different cultures, different languages. And from a really young age, I think I saw immediately what happens when there's patience and time and maybe a technique in place to talk about differences and disagree with respect. And then I also saw what it's like when that's not in place. And so I think from a very young age, I was always trying to think of how to glue things together, how to mend things, how to make sure that we celebrate our differences and at the same time are unique individuals and still have the chance to disagree and belong. Because I really believe that healthy communities, healthy societies are full of disagreements and full of belonging, and those things aren't necessarily exclusive. They don't live outside of themselves. So my formal training and education, I would say, in communication is all around persuading, but my hope and I think my upbringing and the wonderful opportunity that I got to live in, I've lived in Asia, I've lived in Europe, and I've lived in the US in different parts. I think it's just really allowed me to see that before someone is understood, they have to be heard. Before someone hears something new, they also have to be heard. And I also really believe that dialogue should be a habit and not an intervention. And so I really believe in the need to make this part of something that we do, a ritual that we do, and that will create a foundation and a basis for more healthy societies at large.
Great, thank you for sharing that story. So on this journey, what have you experienced as the greatest challenges, this trying to build these kind of conversations, and then what lessons have you learned along the way, or what takeaways are there that because you've obviously done this in very different contexts, so would love to know more about that.
Yeah, so one of the biggest challenges is that when I started off, again, some of the things I just didn't know what I was doing. And to give a little insight to some of the people joining about, what I do, what it's like, is that in the simplest form, people come together, the facilitator is there to guide the session. Everyone writes down a question anonymously, and the group will vote on that question together. So we start in the general format. It can go any direction. It can be any question. The group is led for about an hour on something that I've developed called the Epiphany question method. And the facilitator uses body language and other things to let the group open up and voices be heard. And then it concludes with one final question, typically from the facilitator. So it's an hour long. And, inside of that, as I said, some of the difficult things are well, for one thing, a lot of times people come to groups and they want to walk away. They come with a question, they want to walk away with answers. And so there's a lot of prep that we do in our introduction to prepare people for that outcome that's not typical of what we normally learn throughout our lives. The chance for us to have an unanswered question, even though we dive deep into something and even though we spend time focused on something. So I think that cognitive dissonance and getting people over that was one of the first things I learned. And it's because when I used to introduce it, I introduced it differently. And if I didn't include a small line that said, be prepared to walk away with more questions, people would not always be happy at the end of the session. They would want, they would really want to answer at the end. So I think there's a lot to be said in terms of the first challenge that I realized, which is preparing people to expect to walk away with more thoughts and bring that to their loved ones or their friends. And, there's a lot of other things that happen after that. But one thing that I should say is that we deal with, this started in 2005. And I know a lot of times people are realizing recently that there's a lot of disagreements, a lot of heated disagreements. I will say that for me, I've seen just as many problems within groups as I have historically. It's something that is continuously and ongoing, I think, as part of our humanity. It's part of what makes us who we are. And there has definitely been some tense moments in my discussions. No one has ever, gotten physical or done anything out of line, but there's definitely been tears, some yelling, some high emotions. And so as an 18 or 19-year-old learning how to deal with that, it was definitely a huge learning experience. But I think, 16 years later, I think it's something that has been one of the real values that has happened throughout that process. And for anyone that leads these groups, it's one of the big learnings, which is emotions or anger or sadness don't mean that you walk away from a discussion. It means that you find techniques and you find ways to let voices be heard, and people still, go through the process. And typically the most heated discussions end with a little bit of understanding, thanks, appreciation for holding that space, because it's not something we always get to do. So I don't know if I answered your question all the way, but those are the two challenges that come to mind for me, Leslie.
Yeah, no, that's great. And you also talked about one of the, a few of the lessons learned about like this unanswered question and emotions, and how that doesn't have to block the conversation and the growth that's possible. So as we, you talked about, which is interesting, interesting that you're not seeing necessarily deeper schisms, but we know that there's data and all sorts of things that try to suggest or tell us that we're more divided. And I would say some of the incidents that have happened in the news and other things seem to confirm that. So what is your vision for the future, keeping in mind sort of that context and the place where we are right now as a nation?
Yeah, easy question to answer. So I think that the main thing that comes to mind for me is just what has gotten us here won't get us to where we need to go. And I agree with you. I think that in some ways, I think social media has really exacerbated some of the polarities that we see. And I think a lot of that has to do with targeting and these newfound circles of silence, or, kind of just this groupthink mentality where if you're on a certain platform, you might only get certain messages, where, a long time ago, the media was kind of the decider of that. And now it's opened up. So you get just bombardment of messages. And I think it's become more and more difficult to find out what's real and what's make believe or fake, right, or made up. But I think the interesting thing is that for me, my theory of change was really that the more opportunities we have for people on their local groups to lead sessions in a way that allows for critical thinking to happen, cultural awareness to happen, self-reflection to happen, I think it won't solve all the problems overnight, but it will give people localized solutions to deal with those issues. And it'll also, what I notice in my groups is that sometimes there's some blind spots. There are people come in and they don't even realize what they're saying might be offensive to the person sitting across from them. But the moment that happens, and the moment people are able to talk about it, pretty quickly people adjust and they realize things. They come to terms with the big distance between what they assumed and what is true about the person in front of them. And so for me, I think, the way to get there is still the same. The way to get to become a better nation, to become a better community, to become better neighbors, to be a better person. I think it all comes to the fact of getting involved with people around you, finding out about them, empathizing with them, sharing your ideas, and, being ready to be proven wrong. And you'd be surprised what happens when people get out from behind computers and their screens and sit down with each other. I think it brings out the best in who we are. And for that reason, I'm less terrified. You know, from what I see in my groups, I'm less terrified of what the future holds because I've seen this human experiment of democracy, you know, take shape in front of me in these sessions. And I think that the more that we give people the chance to do that, I think the more that we are going to be able to give each other the benefit of the doubt and overcome some of these big challenges that we have. So
Great, thank you, Hassan. Well, that was my questions because I wanted to really open this up as a conversation with the folks who are with us today. Just a reminder, if you joined us late, tomorrow we're having an actual intensive training around how to carry this out for faculty and staff, and that's from 1 to 4. But we wanted to start out with, you know, just getting to know Hassan. He's also going to do a training on October 13th for student leaders from 1 to 4. And we just wanted to get to know him. I'm sure you can see why I thought it would be great and beneficial to learn more about this, this wonderful work that's happening. So questions, conversation around this model or Hassan and his background and dialogue. And I know it's always hard to be the first person to step out of the boat, but I invite you, if you want to put it in the chat or to unmute. Okay, Hannah, well done. Can you tell us more about the model itself? Okay, so you gave sort of a quick dive into how it looks, but a little more about that.
yeah, sure. Thanks, Hannah, and Gail. I know you unmuted. We'll happy to answer anything you want to know. So the model itself, Aristotles Cafe is really a scalable, easy to implement model in the classroom or outside of the classroom. It's typically an hour long. You can use it as a spark to start projects or, you know, decision-making plans or other things like that. But in the core of it is that basically the facilitator will open the group up. There's an introduction, other things I won't bore everyone with it, but basically the introduction sets the stage to allow people to know some of the things that I've already said, which is we can be ourselves and disagree and still belong, right? This is time for you to be free with your thinking, to be, you know, to reach and to open yourself up for new ideas. And then we have some ground rules. The first is that the facilitator will only ask questions and not give their own opinion. Second, there are no right or wrong opinions. I repeat, there are no right or wrong opinions. I just ask that you be respectful in your agreement and disagreement. Third, if you could turn all your cell phones and distractions and electronic devices off on Zoom, maximize your screen, turn on the gallery view so you can see everyone. And then fourth is that I just recommend that you try to grow in one way, whatever way that might be, whether it's how you communicate, how you listen, or even vocabulary or whatever might suit you. And then this is not a rule, but a warning. You will probably walk away with more questions than answers. So that's the thing that I kind of stated. And then what happens is that I invite everyone in the room to write down a question on a note card, or when we're on Zoom now, they'll submit it beforehand. I read off the questions, and then people physically, whether it's on Zoom or in person, will raise their hands and they, you know, to show what they are voting for. And we basically go through a majority vote system. And then after that, the facilitator will throw the question in, and then it's up to the group to share their opinions. And it goes for about an hour. And then at the end of it, we wrap up, we recap. There's some other things that we do, but it's a process that flows. I have people that are running these that are quite young, that are teenagers to, you know, retirees or people that have no facilitation background at all. And it's really just about using a few simple methods to get people to open up and share in different ways. I hope that helps, Hannah, and would love to have you tomorrow if you want to dive into it more. And Gail, I don't know if you had a.
I am a groupie along with you and Leslie of dialogue, and just love lots of different methodologies. So one of the groups that I'm involved in during the pandemic, we've done everything virtually, and the benefit has been that we've been able to be in more diverse groups, especially with people internationally and people that we might not be with on a regular basis. And I'm wondering whether that has been true in with the Aristotles Cafe.
Interesting. Thanks so much. So yesterday we had a person that was Thai calling from Thailand at 6 in the morning to our US session. We had a woman that was originally from Russia that lives in Japan now. And we also had a few Americans and things like that. What I'll say is that it depends where it is, because when I did it in Bangkok, Thailand, physically, we had about 50-50 mix of expats and locals. And so that was extremely diverse. And that was a wonderful opportunity for everyone to learn about different cultures, and especially the local culture that, expatriates were living in there. And a wonderful opportunity for that conversation to happen. I should say that I don't strive for a certain demographic. I feel that in my sessions, we are typically pretty well mixed I think by the nature of who comes and who spreads the words about things. And I'm always hoping to create a beautiful room and to have beautiful conversations around that. And we have experimented in different places around the world too, with Iceland or other places, and moving to Zoom. And with COVID, we've had, surprisingly enough, different hurdles, because, for example, our group in Myanmar was unable to meet in person, but they were also unable to join on Zoom because of technology limitations. So I think the answer is yes and no, but we're hoping to continue to bring in more people and do that.
And Kevin, I think your hand was up. You're muted.
Sorry. Yeah, thanks, Hassan. So I have a few questions, just in listening to one. I'm interested in the vote for which question you engage. I'm curious how wide the possibilities, the parameters are for this original question. Is it contextualized by the particular group in any way? Also, you mentioned somewhere there's an epiphany question. So I'm curious what that means. And third, I'm curious about how you train your facilitators.
Great questions. Love your 3 questions. So contextualized, I would say, our questions are very diverse, what people write in. I think the interesting thing is that one thing that's been a really beautiful outcome of leading these sessions each week is that it allows facilitators or educators or who are community leaders to really measure the pulse of their community, because by the nature of the questions that are asked, you'll know what's on people's minds. So during the presidential elections, there was a lot of questions around laws or opinions of who's being elected or things like that. Right now, a lot of it is around grief and hope, and how to have hope during this time of COVID. Worldwide, our people that are, our participants, they're working through death, they're working through, isolation, they're working through all these different things. So I think the one for our general group, our general sessions, the contextualization is always around the pulse of what's happening for them in their daily lives. But we also do special sessions for organizations or, schools or things like that, where we will pick, I always recommend to pick a theme, so make it thematic. So if I pair up with an organization that might be more green energy oriented, then the theme might be, renewable energy, ask a question around that, focus around that. And then that way we can pull out ideas from that community. I hope that helps for that one. The epiphany question method is something I developed because, and I'll use this example tomorrow too, probably, but how many people in here like chocolate? Does anybody like chocolate? Raise your hand if you like chocolate. Great. So if I know that you love chocolate, your favorite dessert, if I tell you right now that chocolate is the worst thing and it's going to cause cancer and you should never eat it, I can almost see it on everyone's faces, like, no, like I'm going to keep eating my chocolate. And I think it's what I saw take place in Thailand when the smog, the pollution was so bad that just to go outside was like smoking a cigarette. People were walking around without masks on, without any kind of protection. I think we're seeing that with COVID too, which is the ability to deal with a new piece of cognitive dissonance or like a new assumption being overthrown is just too much for people sometimes. So I saw that play out at a young age in my groups. And so what I did is I developed a way to ask questions where we might start with something like, what is communication? And instead of immediately asking a question that might make people really push hard into that and throw their assumptions off whack, I allow the group to be heard, and I ask a series of questions to lead the group to kind of a softer approach and an easier way into new ideas and new behavioral changes. So what we do is we create a trail of questions, and then by the fourth or fifth one, once many people have already shared and some assumptions have already been revealed and discussed and kind of played around with, then we will ask the question that creates that kind of aha moment. And it's a bit complicated to explain in like 2 minutes, but there's about 30 minutes that are dedicated to that during the training. And the way that I train facilitators is really like a long-term mentorship normally. You know, I think there's a 3-hour session that I do. And then what happens is that right from that session, people should start going out, holding these discussions, having these experiences. And then we should be able to meet weekly or monthly to do recaps and debriefs on that. And there's different challenges that people face. You know, I would say some facilitators really struggle with when to interject, while other facilitators struggle with which questions they should ask or how to use their body language properly. And so there's not really a one size fits all. It's more of a mentorship and a practice makes perfect type process. Does that help, Kevin? Is that
Yes, very, very much so. I have a follow-up, but I'll let other people get in there if they want.
Okay, great. Mark, I saw that you unmuted if you want to.
I did. A question on audience. Do you usually have a fairly dedicated audience, sort of pre-selected? Gail and I both have been involved in a number of dialogues with techniques. Yours sounds like another good one, but the challenge is always to get people to participate, and particularly diverse people to participate. You may also you may know the National Issues Forum. We've done a number of discussions with their methods, including in person and online. And while the people come and enjoy it, recruiting an audience for that is difficult. Now, if you have a class that says we're going to do it, then you have, you know, that kind of dedicated audience. But I'm wondering what your experience is and what worked for you to get an audience.
Yeah, great question. I mean, I think so. There's a lot to cover there. I think I'm not familiar with the National Issues Forum. I'd love to look into that. So I just made a quick note. And with dedicated audience, so, you know, it's interesting. I have noticed a trend in dialogue and other, even just democratic initiatives, that there's not a very diverse room. I'll just say that, you know, and I'm not entirely sure why, but I think there's a lot of factors that go into that. For me personally, I do have a background in marketing and digital marketing and some other things. And so from a very early point in time, I was always really just doing the footwork and the legwork. Before Facebook happened, I was handing out flyers and putting them in cafeterias and, you know, walking into classrooms and doing demos for Aristotles Cafe and really just pitching to anyone that I could of the value of it and just reaching out, just going up to anybody, you know, no matter what they look like, no matter who they were, and just asking them to join. And I think it's much more difficult now with COVID and other things. I think one of the biggest issues, I think if you want to achieve something like that, or what I should say is that what I found to be successful in achieving something like that is really doing the legwork beforehand to establish relationships, deep relationships. So, with my work in Oklahoma City, I was facilitating groups and training groups in the process, but outside of the facilitation, I was calling every retirement home in the state actually to join, because I wanted to get good cross-generational discussions happening. And then on top of that, I was contacting the United Way, I was contacting the food bank, I was contacting universities. So I think that it's something that is hard to work into that, but I think marketing and almost like a business development mindset goes into it a lot more than people would think. And I think you're right. Demographics that haven't been involved from the start, it's what's the reason for them to get involved now? And how do we make it a long relationship and not just a one-off? We want to take this, not that that's happening that way, but what I mean is that, for me, people that come to my sessions, I should say that typically 50% are regulars, 50% are newcomers. And there's not one person who's ever come to my session just once that are in the physical session. So no matter what, people, everyone has come at least twice. And so I think there's also a certain value add there. And I think that if people are only coming one time and never again, there's something that is not adding value to that participant that's joining. And so maybe I've done a lot of work on rethinking the model and figuring out ways to do that, and figuring out ways that would add value to people and get them coming back. So I'm sorry it's a long-winded answer, but I think all of us in this space struggle with how to get people. And I think those are the common successes and the common pitfalls that I've seen. And happy to talk to you about it more offline too, Mark, if you'd like to connect.
Great. So Kevin, I think you had a follow-up.
Yeah, well, first of all, I love what you said about creating habits. I try to do the same thing with my students, and that's exactly what Aristotle tried to do. And that was his whole ethical framework was based around that, as I'm sure you know. That's what virtue literally translates to, is habitus or place. But I'm curious about something you said about this series of questions leading to this aha moment, because I understand that, and I understand its value, but on the other hand, it seems to perhaps undercut what's going on the surface, which is the appearance of this open dialogue where the facilitator is only asking questions and the people have the freedom to make it whatever they want. But at the same time, there appears to be like this undercurrent, and you're trying to push them toward a particular belief that they experience as an epiphany. And I'm curious how if you wrestle with these things, if you find them in tension or not.
Yeah, great. That's an awesome question. I love that question. So the way that I always train the epiphany question is I say it might happen in the session or it might not. We all as facilitators we all have biases, right? And so I think, what I ask facilitators to do is come as their full selves to these sessions. Some things might make them really agree with something that someone has said or disagree with something that someone said. When we're in person, I have facilitators stare down into the center of the group, which is also very unique, I think, for my approach. So that way we don't show facial expressions as much. So the participants don't know exactly what we're thinking or feeling, and that we can remain more neutral. But on that note too, when we talk about open forum, I think there's different degrees of that. And this is up to the facilitator to decide. Sometimes the conversation might be about a popular TV show, or it might be, about the favorite food that people ate or things like that. And that's always fine. I always say to facilitators, it's fine, and it's lovely to have that space and to let people do that. But we are trying to help people dig a little bit deeper. And I think naturally groups don't always want to. And so we're not necessarily, it's not an agenda. Everything that we ask to inside of that method, it's all about what people said. It's tailored to the opinions that were given, and questions are sculpted off of what the group has said. So facilitators also in this format can never pull from like an outside source or pull from even from their own experience in terms of putting that in. They have to ask a question based off of, and I'm doing this because there's normally, 8 people in a session or 15 that the opinions will be drawn off of. And there's a diagram that I'll be showing tomorrow for that. But it has to be tailored to the group. It has to be an open-ended question that's asked. And it also should generally dive to a deeper, more complex understanding of an issue. And so I would say, you're right. Like, you're right in a big way, which is we don't let groups just go whichever direction they want. We do have a little bit of, guidance inside of there. But I would say that what I've noticed, and the reason why I shifted and created that process in there, was because after one or two years of doing it quite openly, making that shift created much more value for the people that were involved, and it created much more sticking power to what went on in that session in those individuals' minds when they walked away from it. It wasn't just the everyday conversation. It was really, and I say this in my, it was a discussion that matters. These discussions need to be discussions that matter, and to do that, sometimes we have to push just a little bit. Yeah.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. These are great questions. Any other questions? We have about 12 minutes, and so for our conversation.
I guess I have a couple, and first of all, I just want to kind of applaud you for creating something just out of a need. I just love that. I think that's a fantastic thing. I have a master's in organization development, so I have studied this, and there's something wonderful about an organic process and so I just really love that you did that. Yeah, I think it's fantastic. You talked some about a little bit of the differences between cultures, but it sounds like the framework is kind of broad enough that it welcomes all cultures. And I'm just curious if I'm picking up correctly on that, or whether you have noticed difference. Well, you named the difference about the length of time, but I'm wondering if there's other differences.
And I also too, I'm realizing I didn't answer a question that Leslie asked before, which is, have I seen a theme? And I think I should say, over the years and over, across the world, the theme that I've seen is that people want to talk about love. They want to talk about sense of self. They want to talk about compassion, anger, politics, right? So I think one really interesting thing is that the pulse of humanity rings out wherever you might be. It might take a different shape or form. It might be a slightly different perspective, but I think the things that matter to us everywhere. And in terms of the cultural piece, there are slight differences typically to the way that they are introduced at the beginning. In America, I might have to prep people by saying something like, this is a wonderful time to listen and to practice your active listening skills. But in a place like Thailand, it might be, this is a wonderful time for you to speak freely, or to, share your opinion without qualifying it. And, another piece that I should say that's very interesting for, in my opinion, there's certain leanings that genders have throughout the world. I typically, see that people that identify as male are going to be speaking a little bit too much, you know, maybe throwing things out as factual a little bit too much. And people that identify as female typically will qualify things a little bit more than other people in these sessions. So also, I think culturally, or, you know, with genders or with anywhere you might find yourself, these are all things that we do at the beginning to prep. And then off of that, we allow the groups then to organically find their own pacing. And time might be that way, or it might be the way that facilitators ask the questions, or it might even be the space that they want to meet in, because contextually different spaces will have different contexts wherever you might be. I hope that helps, Gail.
Thank you. Yes, very interesting.
Thank you. Anyone else? We've got about 9 minutes. Kevin, it looked like you unmuted.
I'm sorry?
It looks like you unmuted.
Oh, well, I was unmuted, but I'm just curious, is there any, you know, any particular time in all these years, there must have been at least one that just went off the rails, and, you know, is it the, you know, the story you tell as the, the lesson?
Yeah. Well, first off, in the chat, I'm just putting in a little bit of my contact information. And if you want to see the typical weekly sessions that I have too, or join tomorrow, I would love to have you. The worst session that I had was actually when I started off, I was leading a group, and the question that they decided to start with was, does God exist, or is it just a man-made illusion? And this was in the mountains of North Carolina. And there was a very, very nice Christian gentleman in that group, and a very nice atheist gentleman in that group. And at some point in time, you know, things got heated. The very nice Christian gentleman stood up so fast that his seat fell backwards, and he stood up and was shouting. And as a facilitator, this was one of the first times that I'd experienced really this kind of anger in a session. And I did what I do now, and what I train people on how to do now, which is I said, I know that this is an important subject, and that's why we're here to talk about it. I understand that there's opinions that are in the room that not everyone agrees with. And I would love to know, and I turned my body away and used body language. I turned away and to the group that's been acting healthily and speaking in a relaxed, calm way, and made eye contact with the people that were calm in the group to make sure that they speak up and have the floor. I said, what is the definition of religion? And so the really healthy group, you know, some individuals made some comments, and the gentleman that was so angry sat down. The session went for another 45 minutes until we had it scheduled. We ended, and the group ended. And we ended with one final question. And, you know, people came up afterwards and shook my hand and thanked me. The two gentlemen that were in such conflict talked afterwards in a civil way. I don't think that they were going to be best friends. I don't think that they were, you know, going to be going to each other's weddings or anything like that. But, you know, they found a way through it. And I think for me, you know, it's interesting that I think it's a question that I always get, but one thing that I want to say is that I think we don't have enough opportunity to practice the chance to be upset and in communication with somebody. You know, I think that for us to be a better democracy, I think those things need to happen more often so that we can practice for exercising our civic duty, you know, because we're going to be involved with people that disagree with us about really important subjects. And so I think it's good to have the practice to get overwhelmed at moments and feel emotional at moments and find ways to calm ourselves down in group, in situations, in a democratic dialogue, in a session together where there's safe parameters and where there's someone that's really overseeing that process. So I believe another way that I facilitate, I really believe in critical tension. I think that tension leads to transformation. So I don't create too much of a, you know, space where people won't be upset or don't have emotions. I think it's okay to practice in that way because that's when adaptive change happens. And that other people might do it differently. It's my approach as an Iranian Jewish American probably has informed that. So
Thank you.
That's
Thanks,
great.
Kevin.
And just so you know, during you talking about that, Hannah put a reaction of a heart. She loves that. This idea of creating space where people can learn how to disagree, you know, and have the parameters. All right, just a few minutes here. Kevin, it looks like you had a follow-up. I'm reading your face. Oh, okay.
Well,
Yeah.
always following up.
You have a very inquisitive face. I love it. Anyone else in these last few minutes?
And Mark, thanks for, typing that in about the speaker on campus. I think probably not exactly, speaking with a megaphone is not my idea of a dialogue, but it's a start maybe.
Well, you've seen this on every college campus. He had an audience and an organized presentation, beginning with little dots that he filled in. So yeah, but not not dialogue.
Well, yeah.
Kevin?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, I'm curious. So in the spirit of critical tension, I'm curious if if the dialogue ever transforms into debate, or perhaps, just some impromptu debates within a broader discussion. And do you tolerate that, or do you try to shut it down? How fluid is that space?
Like if maybe two people have different, I let that happen. I do let that happen. What I do and the way that I train people in this model is that to read the room, so I think if there's two people going back and forth and the room looks like it's enjoying it and finding value in it and engaged, then I allow that to happen. I also at some point in time will, ask like, that's great. My typical mantra is, great. Any other ideas or opinions? Does anyone disagree or agree? That's what I say 75% of the session. And, also just letting other people get involved. I think, you have an hour long. I normally would say 15 people maximum is a healthy group. And so when you have 15 people, that's going to be about, maybe 4 minutes per speaker, right? For an hour long session. So I kind of try to keep that in mind as I lead. Also, sometimes people do not speak at all during our sessions. They just come to listen. That's also fine. I don't call on people or ask them, out of the blue. And then people that like to speak a little bit more, if the group is loving it and if everything is kind of balanced and healthy in the session, I allow that to happen too. So again, I think the main difference that I have seen and been told about the way that I run sessions is that I do it from a very emergent standpoint. I believe that it's okay to allow things to emerge, because as facilitators, I don't think that we're in charge of the entire experience from start to end. We cannot dictate the experience that people have when they join, but we can create a space while they're there. And then the things that they want to follow up on, they're able to, right? That after the hour, some of the best things happen directly after, where they can talk and have their own conversations without you there. You've just created that healthy platform.
Well, that feels like the perfect place for us to thank Hassan and to invite anyone who wants to learn more to come to the session tomorrow from 1 to 4, and that's for faculty and staff. And then we'll have one on October 13th for students. Hassan, thank you for your space in the world and what you were doing to build bridges and to create dialogue and to make our world more just and equitable and open. And, it's a beautiful world, and we just have to learn how to see the beauty in each other. And so we thank you for being part of that. And I invite you all to join us for the future trainings. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, Hassan. That was great.
Thank you.
Thank you.